Ada Renfro found a barefoot boy asleep in her corn crib. His feet were cut open on burnt stubble. She didn't wake him. She set a plate of cornbread on the step and went back inside. For 9 nights she fed him. She asked him nothing, and all the while the county had already closed the book. 3 homesteads burned. A winter's grass gone to ash, and Sheriff Ackerly telling her plain, "Some saddle tramp's fire, Ada. He's 3 counties gone by now. Let it lie." On the 10th night the boy finally spoke. He said the fire didn't start down by the creek. He said it didn't start where every grown man in Rensselaer County had agreed it had. If you believe kindness never goes unnoticed, this story is for you. Before we go on, do me one small kindness back. Tap subscribe, and in the comments tell me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this old story travels. Now, back to the crib, and the boy, and the widow who owed nobody a thing. Ada Renfro had been a widow for 1 year and 11 days. She kept the count the way you keep count of a thing you can't set down. Tom had gone in the fall before, took by a fever that turned on him in 3 days. She buried him herself on the rise behind the house, where the wind came clean off the north pasture. She had no children. She had a quarter section of Kansas dirt near Willow Fork, hard up against the Nebraska line. And she had a habit, learned early and kept hard, of owing no living soul. That was the first thing to know about Ada. She took no charity. When the churchwomen came after Tom died, casseroles balanced on their forearms, she thanked them at the door and did not let them past it. When old Mrs. Deal offered to send her boy over to help with the harvest, Ada said the harvest was small enough for one. She was not proud. Exactly. She just knew what a debt was. A debt was a rope. Once it went around your neck, another hand held the slack, and there was one hand she thought about more than she liked. Harlan Voss held the note on her South 40. She'd signed it 2 winters back, when the well went bad, and the new one cost more than she had. Voss had the money. Voss always had the money. He was the biggest landholder for 30 miles, ran cattle on grass that seemed to spread wider every year, and he lent to half the district at terms that looked kind until you read them slow. He'd smiled when Ada signed. He smiled at everyone. That was the thing about him. You couldn't point to a single unkind word the man had ever said. He just held things, notes and grass and other men's bad seasons, and he waited. The autumn that year was dry, bone dry. The corn came up short, and the well ran low, and the grass on her north pasture went the color of old straw by August. Ada worked it alone, dawn to dark, the way she'd worked everything since Tom. She wasn't afraid of the work. She was afraid of the payment coming due in the spring, and the dry pressing down on every acre she had to make it with. And over all of it, that summer, hung the fire. It had happened in the last week of September. A range fire, they called it, and by the time the wind was done with it, 3 homesteads on the west side of the county were black to the chimney stones. The Dyer place, the Kessler place, the little dugout the Lunt family had scratched out on the coulee, and beyond them, running southeast, near 500 acres of winter grass that belonged to a stockman with the Two Rivers Association. Gone, a whole winter's feed turned to ash in an afternoon. The county needed a name for it fast, the way people always do when a thing is too big to look at plain, and they found one. A drifter. A man named Jubal Rennick who'd been through the district that month, doing odd work, sleeping rough. He'd camped down by the creek, they said. Left a fire he shouldn't have. The wind took it. And Rennick, when the smoke rose, had done what a guilty man does. He'd run. That was the story. Sheriff Boyd Ackerly said it, and Harlan Voss agreed with it. And once those 2 men said a thing in Rensselaer County, it was near enough to true. They ran Rennick out, put word on the line that he wasn't to come back. And everybody, every last soul, found the story easy to hold. Because it asked nothing of them. A stranger did it. The stranger was gone. Winter was coming, and there was work to do. Ada had heard it at the store and nodded along like the rest. She had her own troubles. A dry pasture and a spring payment don't leave much room to wonder about a fire that burned somebody else's grass. She had no idea that dry October that the whole crooked shape of it was asleep in her corn crib with the skin off his feet. She found him on a cold night, near the middle of the month. She'd gone out past dark to see about a sound. Her old collie, dead 2 years now, would have told her sooner, but she went out herself, lantern low, the way a woman alone learns to move. The crib stood off the side of the barn, a slat-walled bin half full of the poor corn she'd managed to bring in. She heard breathing. Quick, shallow, the breathing of something cornered. She lifted the lantern. He was maybe 10. Small for it, though, curled down in the corn, with his knees to his chest and his arms wrapped over his head, like a boy who'd learned to sleep, braced for a blow. His clothes were rags, his hair was matted. And his feet, God, his feet. Bare, cut and torn and crusted black where the burnt stubble of the fields had opened them. He'd walked a long way barefoot over burned ground. He was asleep. Dead asleep, the kind that only comes when a body has run past the end of itself. The lantern light was full on him, and he didn't stir. Ada stood there a long moment. She was a practical woman. She knew what the practical thing was. You didn't take in a strange child. You didn't know where he came from or what he'd run from or who'd come looking. The practical thing was to wake him, get his story, and in the morning take him to Ackerly, who'd know what to do with a runaway. She looked at his feet again. She lowered the lantern. She went back to the house. She cut a square of the cornbread she'd made that evening, still warm in the center, and she put it on a tin plate. She carried it out and set it on the step at the foot of the crib where he'd see it if he woke. Then she went inside and she went to bed, and she did not wake him, and she did not decide anything at all. That was how she told it to herself. She hadn't decided a thing. In the morning, the plate was empty, wiped clean, and the boy was gone. But not gone. That evening, going out to the crib for corn, she saw the shape of him again, deeper in, watching her over the top of the pile with 2 dark, still eyes. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just watched her the way a half-wild thing watches, ready to bolt, measuring whether the hand coming toward it holds food or a strap. She didn't reach toward him at all. She took her corn. And she went back to the house and she cut another square of cornbread and set another plate on the step. That was night 2. Night 3 and night 4 ran the same. She never saw him take the food. She'd set the plate at dusk and find it clean at dawn. She never spoke to him, and he never spoke to her. She told herself she'd sort it out. Take him in when the weather turned. Find out whose he was. But every evening she cut the bread, and every morning the plate was clean, and something in the ritual of it settled into her chest and stayed. She noticed things without meaning to. She noticed he flinched at a name. She'd been out by the crib the 3rd evening, talking low to herself the way people do who live alone, going over her worries out loud, and she'd said the name Voss, just said it, in the middle of some grumble about the note and the spring. And she'd heard the corn shift hard, a scramble, the boy pressing himself back into the far corner like the word itself had teeth. She'd stopped. Looked. Seen nothing but the dark and those 2 eyes. Spooked, she thought. Just a spooked runaway. Some man named Voss had used him hard. Likely, it was a common enough name. She noticed which way he looked. When he came to the mouth of the crib at dusk, tense, checking the world before he trusted it enough to eat, he never once looked toward the creek. He looked west. Always west, up toward the high ground, the ridge that ran along the dire coulee where the fire had started. His eyes went to that ridge and held there like he was waiting for something to come down off it. She thought it was nothing. A boy watches the horizon. What of it? And she noticed one more thing, and thought less of it than any of them. He kept his fist closed. Even asleep, even the first night, his right hand had been shut tight around something, and when he was awake and watching her, that fist stayed knotted at his side or shoved deep in the rag of his pocket. Once, at dusk, reaching for the plate, his hand had opened just enough that the lantern caught a wink of metal. Something small. Tin, maybe, flat and rounded, the size to fit a boy's palm. A match safe, she thought. The little tin box a man keeps his matches dry in. Odd thing for a barefoot child to guard like gold. But children guard strange treasures. She let it go. She had a note coming due, and a dry pasture, and a boy who ate her cornbread and gave her nothing back but silence. She didn't have room to wonder what a runaway held in his fist. She should have wondered, but she was about to learn the county's story a second time, out loud, in a room full of nodding heads, and that telling would push the true one further down than ever. It was the store at Willow Fork, a Saturday, the week after she found him. She'd driven the wagon in for flour and coffee and a paper of needles, the little unavoidable things, counting her coins twice before she spent them. The store was full. Half the district came in on a Saturday. And Harlan Voss was there, and Sheriff Ackerly was there, and the fire came up the way it always came up. Somebody asked about the burned quarters, about the Dyer place and the Kessler place, empty now, black chimneys standing in the ash. What would become of the land? And Voss, leaning easy against the counter with his thumbs in his vest, said what he always said, in that mild, unhurried way that made cruelty sound like weather. Sad business, he said. Sad all around. But a man can't hold ground he's walked off of. There's a clock on abandoned claims, 30 days from when they quit it. If those families don't come back and work it, the land goes back open, and it'll go to whoever files honest. He said honest like the word tasted good. I've an interest in seeing it kept in good hands. That grass shouldn't lie idle. Nobody in the store missed his meaning. Voss's own range butted right against those burned quarters. If the Dyers and the Kesslers didn't come back, and everybody knew they had nothing to come back to, that land and the scorched grass beyond it would fall open, and Harlan Voss would file on it honest and quiet, and near 500 acres would slide into his hand like it had been meant to all along. Then somebody asked about the drifter, about Rennick, and Ackerly answered, thumbs in his belt, sure as Sunday. That case is closed, he said. It was the drifter's fire, and the drifter's gone. Ran the night it lit, which tells you all you need. I'll not waste the county's money chasing a man 3 counties off for a campfire he was too drunk to bank. It's done. He looked around the store, and heads nodded, one after another, all down the counter and back. One more thing, he added. There's runaway children been seen on the line, orphans off the burned places, or off worse. Anybody sees such a child, you bring word to me. The county'll collect them. See them placed. We don't want them wild on the roads through the winter. Placed. Ada knew what placed meant on the frontier. It meant a boy handed to whatever grown man would take him for the work of him. It meant a child traded like a plow. She stood at the far end of the counter with her flour and her coffee and her paper of needles, and she said nothing at all. All around her the neighbors nodded. The drifter did it. The drifter's gone. Bring the strays to the sheriff. The wrong story was becoming fact right there in the warm store smell of coffee and coal oil, and Ada Renfro stood silent in the middle of it. One woman with a note held by the very man who wanted the burned land, and she did not say a word. What was there to say? She had no other story. She had a spooked boy in her crib who wouldn't speak, who flinched at a name, who watched a ridge. That wasn't a story. That was nothing. She paid her coins and she loaded her wagon, and she drove home in the cold, with the whole county's easy answer riding in the bed behind her. She didn't know the boy had heard it too. He'd crept to the edge of the timber that morning, the way he'd started to range a little in the daylight, and he'd been near enough to the road when a wagon of talk passed to catch the shape of it. "Bring the strays to the sheriff. The county'll collect them." He'd heard those words in that man's voice before, in other counties, other stores. He knew exactly what they meant. He was in the crib when Ada got home, pressed to the back wall, and when she set the plate that night, he didn't come for it till long after her lamp went out. Now the days got harder, and the boy and the trouble both dug in. The dry held. The note sat in her mind like a stone in a boot. And there was a boy eating, which sounds small until you're a widow, reckoning a thin winter to the last measure of meal. A growing boy eats. She found herself cutting the cornbread bigger and her own portions smaller, and telling herself it made no difference, which was a lie, and she knew it was a lie, and she cut it bigger anyway. That was nights 5, 6, 7, 8. She never got a word from him. But the boy, in his silence, began to answer her another way. She found the crib mended. 2 of the bottom slats had rotted and sprung loose that summer, and she'd meant to fix them and never had the hours. One morning she came out, and they were fixed, set back true and pegged tight, neat work, a boy's small hands doing it careful in the dark while she slept. She stood and looked at it a long time. She didn't say anything to him. She didn't know how. But that evening she cut the bread a little bigger still. She found her kindling split. She'd come out one morning before light, arms full for the stove, and found the day's kindling already split fine and stacked by the block, the hatchet set down clean beside it. He'd done it in the black before dawn, quiet, and slipped back to the crib. He was paying her. That was what it was. He couldn't say a word of thanks and wouldn't take a thing for free, and so he mended and split and stacked in the dark, working off a debt she'd never once asked him to carry. She recognized it because it was her own blood in it. Oh no, man. Pay your way. The boy was made of the same hard cloth she was, and it near broke her to see it in something so small. And still, without knowing she was collecting them, she gathered the clues. He knew the ridge. She caught it in 100 small ways, the way he oriented, the way his eyes ran the high western ground, and once, only once, he said something. Not to her. To himself, low, watching that ridge at dusk. She'd come around the barn quiet and heard it. "Come from the wrong side," he murmured. "Smoke come from the wrong side." She stopped. She didn't understand it. Wrong side of what? She almost asked, and then she saw the set of him, coiled and far away, and she let him be. She filed it with the rest of the strange small facts of him, and understood none of it. The match safe surfaced once more. He'd fallen asleep in the daylight, worn out, half in the sun at the crib's mouth, and his fist had loosened, and it had rolled from his palm onto the sill. A little tin box, flat, rounded corners, worn bright at the edges from handling. And stamped into the lid, plain, 2 letters. She saw them clear before he woke with a jerk and snatched it back to his chest. 2 letters. H.V. She thought nothing of it. Letters on a tin box, some peddler's mark, some stranger's initials. She turned back to her chickens, and it went clean out of her head. She had a note coming due to a man named Harlan Voss, and she never once, in that dry October, put the 2 letters in her hand together with the name in her ledger. Why would she? The truth was sitting in her crib in a boy's closed fist, and she walked past it every single day and never saw. Then the rider came, and Ada Renfro did the thing that changed her from a woman feeding a stray to a woman hiding a witness. It was near the end of the month. Late afternoon, the light going long and gold. She was at the woodblock when she heard the horse, and she looked up and saw a man coming in off the road at an easy walk. She knew him by his hat, before his face. One of Voss's men. A rangy fellow named Cobb, who did the riding and the collecting Voss didn't dirty his own hands with. Ada set down the hatchet. She didn't look at the crib. That was the first thing. She made herself not look at the crib, though every nerve in her wanted to. She knew the boy was in it. She'd seen him slip back an hour before, and she knew, cold and sudden and complete, that Cobb was here about a child. Word had gone up and down the line. Bring the strays to the sheriff. And Voss's man was riding the district, and he'd stopped at her gate. Evening, Ms. Renfro. Cobb touched his hat, but didn't get down. Fine evening. Cobb, Misser. Voss has us asking around. He let his horse blow and shift. There's a runaway boy been seen on the line. 10, 11 years. Barefoot, they say. Off one of the burned places, likely, or just some stray. Sheriff wants him collected before the cold. You seen any such child come through? And Ada Renfro, who had not told a deliberate lie since she was a girl, who prided herself on owing no man even the small debt of a falsehood, looked Voss's man dead in the eye and lied. No, she said. Seen no child. I'd have brought word if I had. Her voice was flat and even and sure. It's just me out here, Cobb. Same as always. Cobb looked at her, looked past her at the still yard, the quiet barn, the crib sitting harmless in the last of the light with its new pegged slats. Ada did not look where he looked. She held his eyes, and she held her lie steady, and she felt her own heart going hard against her ribs. Well, Cobb said at last, you do see one. You bring word. There's the county's interest in it. He wasn't unkind about it. That was the worst of it. He was just a man doing an errand. Cold's coming, Ms. Renfro. No place for a boy on the roads. No, she agreed. It isn't. He touched his hat again and turned his horse and rode out, unhurried, back toward the road, and Ada stood at the block and watched him grow small and gold in the dying light until he was gone over the rise. Then her knees went, just a little, and she put a hand on the block to steady herself. She'd done it now. She understood that plainly, standing there in the cold coming dark. She had lied to Voss's man to Voss's face by proxy, and she had done it to keep a boy she couldn't name from being handed to men who'd use him. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She wasn't feeding a stray anymore. She was hiding him. And she didn't even know from what. She went in and she cut the cornbread, bigger than ever, and she carried it out and set it on the step. The boy was watching her from the dark of the crib. She could feel it. She stood a moment with her back to him. Nobody came, she said, low, to the air, to the corn, to nobody. You hear? Nobody came here today. Then she went inside. The days after that were the strangest of her widowed life, and she has said since that they were also, in some way she couldn't explain, among the fullest. The county went on with its easy story. Somewhere in a land office a clock was running, 30 days from the day the Dyers and the Kesslers walked off their black ground, and when it ran out those quarters would fall open, and Harlan Voss would file on them honest and quiet, and take his rival's scorched grass with them. Near 500 acres, sliding into one man's hand. And the whole of the proof against it was a barefoot boy in a widow's corn crib, and not one grown soul in Rensselaer County had thought to ask him a single thing. Ada knew he'd seen something. She was sure of that much by now. A boy doesn't watch a ridge like that, doesn't flinch at a name like that, over nothing. But she didn't push. She'd learned that pushing sent him to the back wall. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She fed him, and she asked him nothing. On the 9th night, the cold came down hard, the first real teeth of it, and Ada took her cornbread out to the step and set it down. And beside the plate she set one thing more. Tom's boots. She'd kept them a year. His good boots, the leather still sound, sitting by the door where he'd left them, and she'd never been able to give them to the churchwomen or sell them or burn them. She'd just kept them, the last shape of his feet in the world. And that 9th cold night, she carried them out and set them on the step beside the plate. And she didn't say a word about it, didn't say here or take these or your feet, because she knew the boy couldn't bear a gift with words on it. She just set them down and went in. She watched from the window, once, in the dark. She saw the small shape come from the crib to the step. She saw him stop over the boots a long time, still, the way a body goes still over a thing too big to take in easy. And then she saw him sit down on the cold step and pull them on, her dead husband's boots, on a runaway boy's ruined feet. And she turned from the window, because it was not a thing she had any right to watch. That was the 9th night. She thought, if she thought anything, that she'd feed him through the winter and sort it out come spring, the boy and the trouble and all of it. She didn't know that the 10th night was coming. She didn't know that the boy sitting on her step in her husband's boots had made up his small hard mind at last, that he had decided, after 9 nights of a woman who fed him and asked him nothing, that maybe, this was the one grown person in the whole burned county who might hear the truth and not sell him for it. She didn't know that on the 10th night he was going to tell her where the fire really started, and that once he did, nothing in Rensselaer County would ever sit easy again. The 10th night came in cold and clear, the kind of cold that makes a body honest. Ada set the plate on the step like always. Cornbread, still warm from the pan. She turned to go back in. "Ma'am." She stopped. It was the first word he'd ever said to her. Small and rough from not being used. She didn't turn around fast. She knew better than that now. She turned slow, the way you turn toward a bird that might spook. He was standing in the crib door in Tom's boots, too big for him. He held them on his feet by will alone. "You didn't sell me to that man," he said, "the one that rode up. You lied to him." "I did," Ada said. Why? She thought about it. She wanted to give him a true answer, because she could see he'd been fed lies his whole short life and could smell them coming. "Because you were in my crib," she said, "and you were hungry, and it wasn't his business." The boy looked at her a long while. Then he sat down on the step, careful, and he put his hand in his pocket, and he took out the tin match safe he'd been keeping there. She'd seen the shape of it through his clothes for 9 nights, and never asked. He set it on the step between them. The lamplight from the door caught the little stamped letters. "H.V., you know whose this is," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Ada said. And that was true too. Harlan Voss. The boy's whole body went tight saying it. It's his. He dropped it. Up on the ridge, where he set the fire. Ada lowered herself down onto the step beside him. Slow, her knees weren't what they were. She didn't reach for the match safe, and she didn't reach for the boy. She just sat. "Tell me," she said. And he did. "Everybody says the fire come up from the creek," he said, "from the drifters' camp down in the bottom. That's what they all say. The sheriff says it. But that ain't so, ma'am. A fire in the creek bottom don't burn the Dyer place. It can't. The Dyer place is up on the flat, north and west, and the wind that night come out of the northwest. Hard. All night. I know because I was in it. You were up there. We was living in the old dugout on the Dyer coulee rim. Me and," he stopped. His jaw worked. "Just me now. We was up there. And the fire didn't come up the hill to us. Fires don't climb a hill against the wind, ma'am. They can't. That one did." He turned and looked at her, and his eyes were an old man's eyes in a boy's face. It did because a man carried it up there. Carried it up to the top where the wind would take it, and then he rode off east before the sky went red. I watched him go. Ada didn't say anything. The cold sat on them both. "He set it on the high ground," the boy said. "Upwind, so it'd run downhill and downwind, southeast, right across all 3 homesteads and out onto the grass. A man that knows this country would set it right there. A drifter passing through wouldn't know the rim from the road." He picked at the boot leather. It weren't careless. It weren't a campfire got away. He walked out to the coldest, meanest spot on that whole ridge, in a wind that'd carry it, and he lit it, and he left. You saw his face. "Sorrel horse," the boy said, with a notch cut out the near ear. "I seen the horse first, tied off in the dark. Then I seen him strike the match. Wind kept blowing it out. He struck 4-5, cussing. Then it caught in the dry grass and stood up all at once, and the light was on his face. And it was Voss. I know Voss. Everybody up on the line knows Voss. He rode off east and never looked back once, and the fire come down the hill after us. He swallowed. That's when I run. Been running since. And this. Ada looked at the match safe, but didn't touch it. Dropped it up where he struck the matches. In the dark, cussing, he must have dropped it. I found it in the light of his own fire, going the other way. I don't know why I kept it. Reckon I thought, he shrugged, a small hard motion. I thought somebody someday might want to see whose it was. Ada finally let herself understand the shape of it, the whole shape, and it turned her cold in a way the night couldn't. Why'd you run, though? She said gently. Why didn't you tell the sheriff? The boy laughed. There was no child left in the laugh. Ma'am, he said, I'm a barefoot boy nobody owns. Voss is the richest man for 30 miles, and the sheriff eats at his table. Who do you figure the law believes? Me or him? He shook his head. I tell that story to the wrong grown man, and I'm the one they hang, or I'm the one that just goes missing on the road. A boy like me goes missing all the time, and nobody writes it down. And there it was, the thing that had kept him mute for 9 nights. Not that he didn't know the truth, that he knew exactly what the truth costs the one who carries it, when the one who carries it is small. What's your name? Ada asked. She'd never asked. She'd fed him 9 nights and never once asked. Silas, he said. Silas, she said back like she was setting it somewhere safe. I'm Ada. I know, he said. I heard the man call you Ada. When you lied for me. They sat there a while longer, the plate cooling and the match safe between them, and Ada Renfro understood that her quiet winter was over. That she had a boy in her crib who'd watched the richest man in the county light a fire that burned 3 families off their land, and that Voss meant to take that land, all 480 scorched acres of it, the day the 30-day clock ran out on the folks he'd burned off it. She understood that she was the only grown soul in Rensselaer County who knew. And she had no idea in the world what she was going to do about it. Sleep didn't come. She lay in the dark and turned it over. The easy thing, the natural thing, was to hitch the wagon at first light and drive the boy to Sheriff Ackerly and set him in a chair and let him tell it. That's what a person did. You took the truth to the law. But she made herself think it through, the way Tom used to make her think a thing through before she spent $1 on it. She pictured it. Silas in a hard chair in Ackerly's office. Ackerly, who'd already closed the book, who'd already told the whole store that the fire was a drifter's and the drifter was gone. Ackerly, who owed Voss his goodwill, and maybe more than that. And Voss, sent for, standing in the doorway, looking down at a runaway boy in a dead man's boots. She pictured whose word would stand. And she knew. If she put the boy in a room with Voss, she wouldn't save the truth. She'd just hand Voss the one witness against him. She'd hand him Silas. No, she lay there. And she saw it clear. The mistake everybody made was thinking the truth had to walk in on the boy's own 2 legs. It didn't. The boy had already told it. What she had to do was carry it somewhere it couldn't be buried, to somebody who couldn't be leaned on, and do it without ever setting the child across a table from the man he'd named. She just had to think of who that was. She thought about it 3 days. They were hard days. She kept Silas close and out of sight. Word had gotten thin in the county, but it moved. Mrs. Deal mentioned, over the fence, that Voss's man Cobb was still asking after a boy, and that Cobb had said this time that the boy was wanted particular. That Mr. Voss himself had an interest. That word went into Ada like a splinter. Voss himself. He'd heard something. Somebody had seen the boy, or heard the boy was seen, and it had climbed up to Voss, and Voss knew there was a barefoot witness loose in his county. Silas felt it change. Boys like that feel the weather turn. On the third morning she came out, and the crib was empty, and her heart went straight down into her stomach, and then she found him at the woodpile with the axe, splitting her kindling in the gray dark like he'd done more than once, only this time she could see he'd been getting ready to run. His little bundle was tied. Tom's boots were on his feet, and he was fixing to bolt in them. "You'll trade me," he said, not looking up. "You've had 3 days to think on it, and you've figured out the smart thing is to trade me for peace with Voss. Everybody does. I should have run the first night. Silas, you should have let me run." He was shaking. The axe hung in his hand. "I knew better than to tell. I knew it. The one time I tell, and now the whole county's hunting, and you're going to give me up, because that's what grown folks do." Ada crossed to him and did the one thing she'd never done in 10 nights. She took the axe out of his hand, gentle, and she set it down, and she took hold of his shoulders. "Look at me," she said. "I have never in my life owed a soul, and I've never let a soul owe me. You hear? I don't trade. I'm not taking you to Voss, and I'm not taking you to Ackerly, and I'm not taking you to any man who'd rather have a rich neighbor's goodwill than a burned family's justice. I'd sooner burn this place myself." She held his eyes. "I've figured out where the truth goes. And it isn't a place that needs you to sit across from that man. Not ever. I promise you that. You'll never be in a room with him. But I have to ride tomorrow, and you have to trust me one more day. Can you do that? One more day." He looked at her for a long time, the way he'd looked at her on the 10th night, weighing whether a grown person's word was worth the paper it wasn't written on. "One more day," he said finally. She rode at dawn. Not to Ackerly. 2 winters back she'd sat in the back of a full Grange hall and heard a man named Elias Ward speak. Ward was the brand inspector for the Two Rivers Stock Association, and one of the association's members had run cattle on the winter grass that burned, near 500 acres of it, gone in a night. Ward was a procedural man, a paper man, dull as a fence post, and just as straight. He didn't answer to Voss. He answered to an association of stockmen who'd lost real money in that fire, and who wanted, more than they wanted anybody's goodwill, to know who owed them for it. Ward was the one route Voss had never thought to guard. Because Voss, like every man of his kind, was sure that nobody who mattered would ever ask a runaway boy anything. Ada found Ward at the stage stop in Two Rivers, going over a tally book. She told him plain. She had a witness to the range fire. A child. The child had seen it set from the upwind ridge and could describe the ground and the wind and the man. She would not bring the child to a courthouse, and she would not sit him across from the accused, not for any money, and if that was a condition, Mr. Ward couldn't meet, she'd bid him good day. Ward set down his pencil. He was quiet a while. Then he asked her one thing. "Does the child's account fit the ground?" "You ride out and read the ground," Ada said. "And then, you tell me." He rode out. He read it. And what Elias Ward found on that scorched ridge 2 weeks after the fire changed everything, because the ground doesn't lie, and the ground doesn't owe Voss a thing. They did it in the schoolhouse 3 nights later, by lamplight. That was Ada's condition, and Ward kept it. Not a courthouse. A schoolroom, the little one at Willow Fork, with the desks pushed back. Ward sat at the teacher's table with his tally book and a clean sheet of foolscap. The schoolteacher, Miss Prentice, sat as one witness, because she could write a fair hand and had no stake in it. The justice of the peace, an old man named Fowler who'd married and buried half the county, sat as the other, to make it a sworn and dated thing, official, on paper, that no man could later say never happened. And Harlan Voss was not there. Nor Ackerly. Nobody Silas had named. Ada had made sure of it. The boy would speak to men who had to write it down, and never once to the man he was writing down. Ada stood at his shoulder the whole time, her hand on the back of his chair. Silas talked. Plain, the way he'd talked to her on the step. He told them about the dugout on the dire Kool-Aid rim, and how his people had lived there, and how there wasn't anybody now but him. He told them the wind was out of the northwest, hard, all that night. He told them a campfire in the creek bottom couldn't have climbed the hill against that wind to reach the dire flat. That fire runs with the wind and downhill, not against the wind and up. He told them about the sorrel horse tied in the dark with a notch cut out of the near ear. He told them about the man striking match after match against the wind and cussing until the grass stood up in flame, and the light on the man's face, and how it was Voss, and how Voss rode off east before the sky went red. Then he reached in his pocket, and he set the tin match safe on the teacher's table. The lamp caught the two little letters. H.V. Old Fowler leaned forward and read them, and sat back, and didn't say anything for a good while. Miss Prentice's pen had stopped. Ward picked the match safe up, and turned it in the light, and set it back down exactly where the boy had put it, like it was evidence now, and not a thing a child had carried in his pocket for a month. "Where'd you find this, son?" Ward said. "Up top," Silas said. "Where he struck the matches. He dropped it there in the dark. I found it going the other way, running," Ward wrote for a long time. When he finished, he read it back, every word, and asked Silas was that true and right, and Silas said it was. And old Fowler swore him, and dated it, and signed it, and Miss Prentice signed under him, and Elias Ward signed last. And that was the thing Ada had understood, lying awake on the 10th night. A child believed, written down, sworn, by men who had to. And the boy never once in a room with the man who'd have buried him. What Ward laid beside that deposition, over the next days, was the part Silas couldn't have faked if he'd tried. Ward had already read the ground. Now he read it against the boy's words, and every line matched. The burn pattern started high on the dire coulee rim, on the flat, upwind, not down in the creek bottom where the county said. The char ran southeast, downhill and downwind, fanning across the 3 homesteads and out onto the grass, exactly the way a fire set on that rim in a northwest wind would run. No fire that started in the creek could have burned that way. It was against the wind and up the hill, and fire does not go against the wind and up the hill. The ground had been saying so for a month, and no one had gone and asked it, because everyone already had their answer. And there, on the upwind set point where the boy said the man had struck his matches, Ward found the scuffed print of a horse held standing, and the burnt grass thickest, the way it goes where the flame is born, and not where it's only passed through. That was where the match safe had lain. The boy had put a stranger there in his story, and the ground had a man standing exactly there. Then Ward pulled the last thread, the one nobody had bothered with. The drifter. Jubal Rennick, run out of the district on Ackerly's word. Ward sent a wire to the next county over, to the town of Ashfield, and asked one plain question. And the answer came back plain. On the night of the fire, Jubal Rennick had been locked in the Ashfield jail, drunk and disorderly, from sundown to the following noon. Signed for by the Ashfield marshal. He was 30 miles off, behind bars, with a marshal's own name to prove it, on the very night Ackerly had blamed him for a fire he could not by any law of God or distance have set. Nobody had pulled that wire. It had been sitting there the whole time, a man's whole innocence, one telegram away, and nobody had reached for it, because reaching for it might unsettle a story everyone found comfortable. And so, quietly, on paper, with the association behind him, Elias Ward carried the whole thing to the land office. And when Harlan Voss's entry came up, his filing on the 480 burned acres, the day the abandonment clock ran out, the paper that would have made him the biggest man not for 30 miles but for 50, the land office set it aside. Contested, a sworn deposition, a matching burn pattern, and a stamped tin match safe recovered at the point of origin, all naming the man who'd filed to profit by the burning. The association pressed. The 480 acres did not go to Voss. They stayed, held open, for the Dyer and Kessler families, if they could be found and brought back. Each man met it in his own way, and Ada was there, or heard it told, for each. Voss met it standing on the porch of the Willow Fork store, on the day Elias Ward and Old Fowler came to serve him the land office notice and the copy of the deposition. Voss read it standing up. His face didn't do much. He was too big a man to let his face do much in front of the store porch. He read that a boy had watched him strike matches on the Dyer rim. He read about a sorrel with a notched ear, which was a horseman had seen him ride. He read his own initials stamped in tin, and when he was done reading he handed the papers back to Ward, and he said the one sentence a cornered rich man always says, "I'll have my lawyer look at it." And then he waited, the way he always waited, for the porch to fill in behind him with agreement. For some neighbor to say, "Now Harlan, this is surely some mistake," for the county to close ranks around its richest man the way it always had. Nobody said a word. The porch was full of the same men who'd nodded when the fire was closed. And not one of them spoke for him. That silence was the sound of Harlan Voss's standing in Rensselaer County, going out from under him, all at once, like grass in a wind. Ackerly met it worse, because Ackerly had to eat his own file. Ward had gone over his head to the association and the land office and the district court, and the fire investigation Ackerly had closed was pried back open by men he couldn't lean on. He stood on that same store porch a week later and read the reopened findings aloud, because he was made to, and his own voice had to say Voss's name in the place where he'd put the drifters. He had to say, out loud, before the very neighbors he'd told to let it lie, that the fire had been set, deliberate, from the upwind ridge, and that Jubal Rennick had been in the Ashfield jail the whole night, provable 30 miles gone. His easy story died in his own mouth, in front of the whole town. He didn't lose his star that year, but he lost the thing a lawman lives on, which is the county's belief that he knows what he's talking about. And he never quite got it back. Ward, for his part, met it the way a paperman meets a thing too big for his paper. When it was all sworn and matched and filed, he came out to Ada's place, and he stood in her yard with his hat in his hand, and he looked out toward the burned ridge, and he said, "A child watched the whole of it, Mrs. Renfro. Stood up there and watched a man do it. And for a month not one of us thought to ask him a single question." He shook his head slow. We'd have hung a drifter and handed Voss his neighbor's land, and the only soul who saw it true was a boy too scared to speak. It don't sit right with me. How close it came. Ada told him it didn't sit right with her either. That was all either of them could find to say about it. The county paper printed it. Ada bought a copy at the store and set it on the counter and read it standing there. Jubal Rennick's name, printed, cleared, the charge against him lifted. The man himself owed an apology the county would never quite manage to send after him wherever he'd run. A neighbor stood beside her at the counter, reading the same column, a man who'd nodded along when the fire was closed and the drifter blamed. He read it all the way down. He didn't say a word. He just folded the paper back up and set it down and walked out. And Ada figured that folded-up silence was as close to shame as some men ever get. Spring came the way it does, all at once after it seems it never will. The corn crib was mended. Silas had done it himself, slat by slat, over the long tail of winter, until it stood square and tight the way it had when Tom was alive. It was full now, full of last fall's ears, because Ada had brought in a crop after all, on the quarter she'd been so sure she'd lose. Voss had held the note on her South 40, but a man whose own notes get called in against him, a man the district court has turned to, hasn't the standing to press a widow over a quarter section, and the note on Ada's South 40 went quiet, and stayed quiet, and then, in the fullness of it, went away entirely. The boy stayed. There was never a day it was decided. He just didn't leave. And she just didn't send him, and along about April, it stopped being a question either of them thought to ask. Tom's boots fit him now. He'd grown into them over the winter the way boys do, and they were his boots and not a dead man's anymore, and Ada found she could watch him walk across the yard in them and feel nothing but glad. The tin plate came in off the step. For 9 nights she'd set it out there in the cold, and he'd eaten alone in the dark and left it empty by morning. Now it sat at her table. His place. Set every night across from hers, the same tin plate, indoors, in the lamplight, with the two of them at either end of Tom's table eating what the quarter gave them. That was the whole of it. That was the thing she'd bought with 9 nights of asking nothing. A plate that came in off the step. Folks made her out a kind of hero for a while, and Ada Renfro couldn't abide it, and said so. She hadn't detected anything. She told anyone who tried it on her. She hadn't set out to catch Voss, or clear rennet, or save 480 acres. She'd found a hungry boy in her crib, and she'd fed him, and she hadn't asked him a single question, and only long after did she work out what it was she'd been feeding. The truth had been sitting in her corn crib the whole month, whole and true, needing no detective at all. It had only needed one grown person patient enough to leave a plate on a step for 9 nights and ask nothing in return. That was all. That was the entire trick of it. And it wasn't a trick, and she wanted no credit for it. She'd say that, and then she'd go set 2 plates for supper and call the boy in from the yard, and that was Ada. If this story reached you, if it settled somewhere behind your ribs the way the true ones do, then do one small thing before you go. Comment the town you're watching from. I truly do want to see how far a story like this can travel, from Willow Fork clear out to wherever you're sitting tonight, and I read every last one.